For nearly 3 millennia, humanity had known unprecedented peace. After the Great Unification, when Earth finally put aside its differences and reached for the stars as one people, conflict had become a relic of the past. Historian Jack Mason often remarked in his lectures at New Cambridge that modern humans viewed ancient warfare with the same detached curiosity as they did dinosaur bones. Fascinating, but utterly disconnected from their present reality. The Galactic Coalition, formed over 1,000 years ago, when humans first encountered the Zinthuri, had grown to encompass 27 sentient species. Trade flourished. Art and science advanced. The concept of military aggression had become so foreign that many coalition species had evolved beyond it genetically. Admiral Lisa Baker, one of the few humans who still held what was essentially a ceremonial title in the Coalition Defense Force, sat on the observation deck of Harmony Station, watching ships pass through the nearby Wormhole Junction. At 53, her position was largely diplomatic. She couldn't remember the last time she'd had to make a decision more serious than which delegation should be seated closest to the viewports at formal dinners. Her comm unit chimed softly. "Admiral, we're picking up unusual readings from the outer boundary. Unregistered vessels. Several dozen," said Communications Officer Ryan Porter. Baker raised an eyebrow. "Unusual, but hardly alarming. Probably another previously unknown species making first contact. The Coalition welcomed several new civilizations each decade. Standard welcome protocols, Ryan. I'll be down shortly." She had no way of knowing that humanity's 3-millennium vacation from violence was about to come to an abrupt end. On her way to the command center, Baker passed several alien diplomats. A tall, blue-skinned Kilari nodded respectfully. 2 furry Vrox cubs played near the hydroponic garden, supervised by their parent. This was normal life on Harmony Station, diverse species living and working together without conflict. The command center hummed with quiet efficiency. Screens display the approaching vessels. Black, jagged shapes unlike the smooth designs favored by most spacefaring races. "Any response to our greetings?" Baker asked as she took her position. "None, Admiral," Ryan replied. "We've tried all standard frequencies and protocols." Baker frowned slightly. "Keep trying. Perhaps they communicate differently. Prepare the first contact package." The first contact package contained basic mathematical sequences, simple visual symbols, and peaceful greetings in hundreds of languages. It was designed to establish communication with any intelligent species, regardless of biology or culture. "Should we alert Earth?" asked Lieutenant Paul Wright, a young officer recently assigned to the station. Baker smiled. "For an unannounced visit, hardly necessary. We handle new species all the time." The station's chief scientist, Dr. Elaine Foster, studied the sensor readings with growing concern. "These ships have unusual energy signatures, almost like..." She never finished her sentence. The station shuddered violently as something struck the outer hull. Alarms blared. Red emergency lights flashed. "What was that?" Baker demanded, grabbing the console for support. "We've been hit," Ryan shouted in disbelief. "They fired on us." For several seconds, nobody moved. The concept of attack was so alien that their minds struggled to process it. Another impact rocked the station. "Damage report," Baker ordered, ancient protocols surfacing from somewhere deep in her training. "Hull breach on level 4. Automatic systems containing it," Ryan replied, his voice shaking. "Admiral, they're broadcasting something." The speakers crackled with harsh, clicking sounds that needed no translation to convey their meaning. It was a sound humans hadn't heard in 3,000 years. The sound of war. The unknown vessels didn't respond to standard greetings on any frequency. Their design was unlike anything in Coalition records. Angular, asymmetrical, with protruding structures that defied conventional spacefaring aerodynamics. "They're accelerating toward the station," Ryan reported, his voice steady but concerned. "Estimated arrival in 20 minutes." Baker nodded, still unconcerned. Perhaps their communication systems are incompatible with ours. Prepare the translation matrices and cultural exchange packages. The Xanthari ambassador, Cleeks, entered the command center, his gray skin shimmering with anxiety patterns. Admiral Baker, something feels wrong about these visitors. Baker smiled reassuringly. Ambassador, the coalition has encountered over 100 new species. Not once has first contact resulted in hostility. The Xanthari remember violence, Cleeks said softly. Before we joined your coalition, we knew war. These vessels, they move with purpose, with intent. Before Baker could respond, the station shuddered violently. Impact detected, called out Naomi Johnson from the monitoring station. They've fired on us. A collective gasp filled the command center. The concept was so foreign that for several seconds, no one moved. Damage report. Baker finally managed, surprised at how easily the old emergency protocols returned to her. Minor hull breach on level 4. Automatic sealants engage. Naomi replied. No casualties. The station rocked again as a second impact hit. Then a third. They're broadcasting, Ryan said, his voice shaking. Audio only. The harsh, clicking language that filled the command center needed no translation to convey its meaning. It was unmistakably a declaration of war. Baker's training took over. Activate emergency protocols. Begin evacuation of civilian areas. Contact Earth immediately. The crew moved with surprising efficiency, despite having only practiced these procedures in simulations. Within minutes, the first evacuation pods launched toward the nearby coalition outpost. Admiral, we've identified them, said Security Chief Alan West, his face pale. They call themselves the Kraxan Empire. They're demanding our immediate surrender. Baker stared at the screen showing the approaching fleet. 30 vessels now surrounded Harmony Station. Surrender? On what grounds? They claim this sector belongs to them by ancestral right. They say we are trespassers who must submit or be destroyed. The concept seemed absurd. The coalition had explored this region for centuries. There had never been any sign of previous civilization or territorial claim. Can we defend ourselves? Baker asked, though she already knew the answer. West shook his head. Harmony Station has only basic deflector shields. No weapons. The coalition hasn't built warships in thousands of years. Another impact rocked the station, stronger than before. Emergency lights flickered. Structural integrity compromised on levels 2 through 5, Naomi reported. First casualties reported in the diplomatic quarter. Baker's mind raced. 3,000 years of peace had left humanity unprepared for this moment. The Coalition Defense Force existed only as a ceremonial and rescue organization. Get as many people to evacuation pods as possible, she ordered. Priority to civilians and diplomatic personnel. Ambassador Cleeks approached her, skin now pulsing with dark patterns of distress. Admiral, my people once knew war. We have not forgotten everything. Allow me to assist your security teams. Baker nodded gratefully. Thank you, Ambassador. As chaos erupted around them, Baker established emergency communication with Earth. The Global Council would need to be awakened from its peaceful slumber. Humanity would need to remember skills long dormant. On the main viewer, more Kraxan ships appeared. Reports flooded in of simultaneous attacks on 3 other coalition outposts. 3,000 years of peace had ended in less than 30 minutes. News of the attack spread across human space with impossible speed. The Kraxan Empire, as they called themselves in subsequent communications, had simultaneously struck 3 coalition outposts in addition to Harmony Station. Their demands were simple. Immediate surrender of all territories within what they claimed as their ancestral domain, approximately 1/3 of coalition space. On Earth, the Global Council convened its first emergency session in nearly 500 years. We have no military, exclaimed Councillor Jordan Walsh, his normally composed demeanor cracking. The Coalition Defense Force is ceremonial at best. We've spent 3,000 years dismantling our weapons. Council President Olivia Miller raised her hand for silence. At 78, she was considered young for her position, known for her pragmatic approach to governance. "That's not entirely accurate," she said quietly. The room fell silent. "While it's true that we've maintained peace for millennia, humanity has never quite forgotten its past," she continued. "Project Memory has been maintained by every council since the unification." "Project Memory?" Jordan asked. Olivia nodded to her aide, who activated the central display. Schematics for warships, weapon systems, and military formations appeared. Our ancestors were wise enough to hope for peace, but practical enough to prepare for its failure. Deep within Mercury's mantle, automated factories have been maintained, ready to be activated if needed. The knowledge of warfare, strategy, tactics, weapons design has been preserved and continuously updated as a safeguard. Around the council table, expressions of shock slowly gave way to something else, a glimmer of an emotion long dormant in human consciousness. Not fear, not anger, interest. "How long would it take to activate these factories?" asked Councillor Samuel Dixon. "They're already online," Olivia responded. The moment the attack was confirmed, the activation codes were sent. "The first vessels will be ready within 72 hours. In the stunned silence that followed, Samuel leaned forward. "Councillors, I believe I speak for many when I say I'm experiencing a most peculiar sensation. I believe our ancestors called it anticipation." The meeting continued long into the night. Reports from across coalition space painted a grim picture. The Kraxun were methodical and ruthless. They targeted civilian centers as readily as infrastructure. Species that had known only peace for generations found themselves helpless against the onslaught. By morning, the first human military commands had been established. Men and women who had studied ancient warfare as academic exercises found themselves appointed to positions unused for millennia. General, Admiral, Commander. Most surprising was humanity's response. There was no panic, no mortal outrage. Instead, a strange calm determination spread across Earth and its colonies. Volunteers lined up by the millions to join the newly formed defense forces. "It's like we're waking up from a long sleep," mused Dr. Peter Garcia, a psychologist observing the phenomenon. "The capacity for warfare never left our DNA. It was just dormant, waiting for the right trigger." 3 days after the initial attacks, Admiral Lisa Baker arrived at Earth from the damaged Harmony Station. She had expected to find a planet in chaos. Instead, she found a world transformed. Where once stood art centers and philosophy institutes, military training grounds had sprung up. Scientists who had devoted their lives to medicine and exploration now turned their brilliance to weapons systems and defense technologies. "How is this possible?" she asked President Miller during their first meeting. Miller smiled grimly. "We never forgot who we were, Admiral. We just chose to be something better. Now we must remember how to be both." 3 days after the initial attacks, the Kraxun Empire sent a massive battle fleet to the Proxima Centauri colony. They expected to find panic, disorganization, and submission. What they found instead was Admiral Lisa Baker aboard the newly commissioned vessel Audacity, at the head of 60 ships that hadn't existed a week earlier. "Open a channel," Baker ordered. On the view screen, the alien commander appeared, a chitinous being with multiple compound eyes and mandibles that clicked as it spoke. "Humans," the translation matrix rendered, "you face the might of the Kraxun Empire. Your extinction is inevitable. Surrender now, and some may be preserved as study specimens." Baker smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "This is Admiral Lisa Baker of the Reformed Earth Defense Force. We've been reviewing our history books. Do you know what humans used to do before we decided peace was preferable?" She didn't wait for a response. "We perfected the art of war. For hundreds of thousands of years, while your ancestors were still figuring out how to make fire, we were killing each other with increasingly creative methods. We got so good at it that we nearly destroyed ourselves. Then we decided to stop. Not because we couldn't, but because we chose not to. Baker leaned forward. You've made a terrible miscalculation. You assumed our peace meant weakness. Let me be clear. Humanity didn't forget how to fight. We just hadn't found anyone stupid enough to remind us. She nodded to Weapons Officer Kyle Martinez. Fire when ready. The battle lasted less than 20 minutes. 47 Craxon vessels were destroyed or disabled. The remaining ships retreated in disarray. As the Audacity's crew assessed the aftermath, Lieutenant Amber Daniels approached Baker. Admiral, permission to speak freely? Baker nodded. I've never experienced combat before today. None of us have. It should have been terrifying. She paused, but it wasn't. It felt natural, like remembering how to ride a bicycle. Baker studied the young officer. Humanity spent far longer at war than at peace. Lieutenant, perhaps some things are written too deeply in our DNA to ever truly forget. The victory at Proxima Centauri was just the beginning. Within days, human forces had engaged Craxon fleets at 12 different locations across Coalition space. The long-dormant factories on Mercury and Mars now operated at full capacity, producing vessels, weapons, and equipment at a pace that astonished even their human creators. Most surprising was how quickly humans adapted to warfare. People who had spent their lives as artists, teachers, and philosophers now commanded squadrons and battalions with surprising skill. It was as if humanity had been holding its breath for 3,000 years and could finally exhale. We're analyzing the Craxon tactics, reported Strategic Officer Frank Rivera during a briefing aboard the Coalition flagship Resilience. They rely heavily on overwhelming force and intimidation. When met with effective resistance, they become disorganized. They expected easy prey, Baker observed, not predators. The human response was methodical and precise. Unlike the Craxon, who seemed to relish destruction for its own sake, human forces struck with surgical precision, minimizing civilian casualties and collateral damage. After a month of constant defeats, the Craxon Empire attempted a direct assault on Earth itself. A fleet of 200 vessels jumped into the solar system, expecting to find humanity's homeworld lightly defended. Instead, they encountered 500 warships arranged in perfect formation around Earth. Admiral Baker, now commander of the combined fleet, sent a simple message. You came to extinguish humanity. Instead, you woke the sleeping giant. This ends today. The Craxon never reached Earth's orbit. For the first time in millennia, the skies above humanity's homeworld flashed with the light of battle, and with the dawn of a new understanding of what peace truly meant. Word of the human victory at Proxima Centauri spread throughout Coalition space, creating shockwaves of disbelief and reassessment. Coalition species had viewed humans as peaceful philosophers, gentle guides who had shown them a better way. Now they were witnessing something else entirely. On the Coalition Council, representatives were divided. Some were horrified by the reemergence of human military prowess. Others were simply grateful. The Xanthari ambassador cliques addressed the emergency session. 3,000 years ago, humans united the stars not through force, but through example. They showed us that cooperation brought greater prosperity than competition. We believed this was their nature. Now we see it was their choice. He paused, his skin shifting to deep blues of respect. The Craxon have attacked 15 more worlds since their first assault. They show no mercy to civilians. They destroy cultural treasures. They seek not conquest, but annihilation. In the face of such an enemy, perhaps we need the humans we never knew existed. In the 2 weeks that followed, Earth's long-dormant factories produced hundreds more warships. Millions of humans volunteered for service, their enthusiasm puzzling even to themselves. Civilian scientists turned their attention to weapons research with disturbing ease. On the newly established military headquarters on Luna, President Miller met with Admiral Baker and the newly appointed General Gregory Mitchell to review strategy. The Craxon have pulled back to regroup, General Mitchell reported. Our intelligence suggests they're shocked by our response. They expected us to be defenseless. We've received requests from 22 coalition worlds for human protection, Admiral Baker added. They're specifically asking for human defenders, not just coalition forces. President Miller studied the galactic map thoughtfully. It seems our neighbors are discovering that having a predator as an ally can be quite advantageous when facing another predator. The coalition species are watching us with new eyes, Baker observed. I'm not sure if it's fear or admiration. Perhaps a healthy measure of both is appropriate, Miller replied. We've remembered how to bare our teeth. We must be careful not to forget why we chose to hide them for so long. The Kraxan Empire, recovering from its initial setbacks, changed tactics. Rather than direct assaults, they began targeting vulnerable civilian worlds far from human protection. The resulting refugee crisis strained coalition resources. In response, humanity deployed rapid response forces throughout coalition space. Small, fast ships carried elite human teams capable of defending worlds until larger forces could arrive. These Guardian units quickly became legendary among coalition species. On the agricultural world of Neef Prime, home to the peaceful Lorani who had no concept of violence in their language, a single Guardian unit held off a Kraxan invasion force for 3 days until reinforcements arrived. The unit's commander, Major Ellen Porter, became an unexpected hero to the Lorani, who created a new word in their language, Porter Shield, meaning one who protects others at cost to self. Not all coalition species welcomed humanity's transformation. The Vrel Conclave, whose philosophy centered on absolute pacifism, formally withdrew from any world with human military presence. We understand the necessity, their elder spokesperson announced, but we cannot bear witness to the resurrection of warfare, even in defense of peace. The contradiction pains us too deeply. President Miller respected their decision and ensured safe passage for Vrel refugees to neutral systems. As the conflict entered its second month, a pattern emerged. The Kraxan avoided direct engagement with human forces while continuing to target defenseless worlds. Humanity expanded its production of ships and weapons. The coalition, once a paradise of art and learning, was transforming into something its founders would scarcely recognize. In her private quarters, Admiral Baker reviewed reports from across the front lines. The ease with which humanity had returned to war disturbed her. Had 3,000 years of peace been merely a pleasant interlude in humanity's true nature? The answer, she suspected, would determine not just the outcome of this war, but the future of human civilization itself. The war escalated rapidly. The Kraxan, recovering from their initial shock, deployed devastating biological weapons against several outer colonies. Millions perished before human medical teams could synthesize countermeasures. In response, humanity unleashed Operation Prometheus, a daring strike deep into Kraxan territory. Led by Captain Eric Nelson aboard the advanced destroyer Determination, the mission targeted the Kraxan homeworld's orbital defenses. The battle was fierce. The Determination lost a third of its crew, including Nelson's wife, Lieutenant Commander Susan Nelson, who sacrificed herself to protect a damaged engine core from explosion. When the smoke cleared, the human fleet had established orbital superiority around the Kraxan homeworld. For the first time, the Kraxan leadership sent an envoy to discuss terms. In the conference room of the Determination, Captain Nelson faced the Kraxan High Commander. "You fight with unexpected skill," the alien admitted through the translator, "but you will find the cost of victory too high. We have seeded 50 coalition worlds with dormant agents. Surrender now, or they will be activated." Nelson had spent the previous night recording final messages for his children. Should he not return? He'd wept for Susan, alone in his quarters where no one could see. Now he felt nothing but a cold clarity. "High Commander, before I respond to your threat, I have a question. Why did you attack us? The Coalition never encroached on your space. We didn't even know you existed." The alien's mandibles clicked in what the translation matrix identified as amusement. "Your peace made you weak. The Coalition's resources were undefended. It was logical to take what you could not protect." Nelson nodded slowly. I understand. You saw kindness as weakness. It's a common misconception. He tapped his console, bringing up images of Earth's ancient history, wars, weapons, destruction on scales that made even the Kraxon commander's compound eyes widen. This is who we were. For hundreds of thousands of years, we didn't choose peace because we couldn't fight. We chose peace because we knew exactly how good at fighting we could be. Nelson leaned forward. Your dormant agents have already been identified and neutralized. Your colony worlds are being systematically liberated. Your supply lines are cut. But we're offering you something your kind would never offer us. Terms of surrender that don't include extinction. The Kraxon commander stared at the human with new understanding. You could destroy us all. Yes, Nelson said simply. We could. That we don't is not weakness, High Commander. It's restraint. And should you ever mistake the two again, I promise there won't be a third opportunity. The negotiations lasted 3 days. The terms were strict but fair. The Kraxon would withdraw from all coalition territories. They would disarm their most destructive weapons. They would join the coalition as probationary members, with human observers on their worlds to ensure compliance. As news of the agreement spread, reactions varied across human space. Many celebrated the end of hostilities. Others questioned whether showing mercy was wise. Admiral Baker addressed these concerns in a system-wide broadcast. Some asked why we didn't push for total victory, why we offered terms instead of annihilation. The answer is simple, because then we would become what we were fighting against. 3,000 years ago, we chose peace not from weakness, but from wisdom. Today, we choose restraint for the same reason. On the journey back to Earth, Captain Nelson stood alone in the observation lounge of the Determination, watching the stars streak by. He held Susan's wedding ring in his palm. We did it, he whispered to the emptiness. We remembered how to fight without forgetting who we are. The path forward would not be easy. Trust, once broken, is difficult to rebuild. But humanity had faced its greatest tests since the unification, and passed. 1 year after the Kraxon surrender, the expanded coalition gathered on Earth for the signing of the new charter. The war had changed everything, and nothing. In the Grand Hall of New Geneva, representatives from 34 species, including, remarkably, the Kraxon, assembled to formalize the peace. Human President Olivia Miller addressed the gathering. 3,000 years ago, humanity put aside war not because we had evolved beyond it, but because we chose a different path. Recent events have shown that the capacity for violence remains within us, dormant but accessible when needed. She looked around the room, meeting the eyes, stalks, and sensory organs of the assembled delegates. Some of you feared us when you saw what we could become when threatened. That fear is not misplaced, but neither is your trust. The same determination that made us formidable in war makes us steadfast in peace. The Zintheri ambassador Cleeks rose to speak next. The Zintheri have a saying, know the true nature of your friend in the moment of crisis. We thought we knew humans as philosophers and peacekeepers. Now we know them as warriors too. But this does not diminish our respect. It deepens it. To choose peace when one is capable of war is the truest form of wisdom. As the ceremony concluded with the signing of the new charter, Captain Eric Nelson stood at the back of the hall with Admiral Baker. Will we go back to what we were? Nelson asked quietly. Will we dismantle the fleets, shut down the factories, try to forget again? Baker considered the question carefully. No, she finally said. I don't think we can pretend anymore. Peace isn't the absence of the capacity for violence. It's the wisdom to use that capacity only when necessary. Nelson nodded slowly. Susan would have liked that idea. The universe now knows what happens when humanity is roused to war, Baker said. With luck, that knowledge alone will ensure we never need to demonstrate it again. Across the hall, a Kraxon representative approached a human diplomat. After a moment of awkward silence, the alien extended its upper appendage in a clearly practiced human handshake. "We misunderstood your people," the Kraksun said. "Peace by choice rather than by nature. It is a concept we are still learning." The human smiled, accepting the gesture. "It took us thousands of years to learn it ourselves, but I think you'll find it's worth the effort." As delegates filtered out of the hall, many glanced up at the new coalition emblem, a modified version of the ancient human symbol of an olive branch. But now, one could discern that the hand holding the branch was also capable of forming a fist. Humanity had not forgotten who they were. They had simply remembered who they chose to be. Under the new charter, the coalition established a standing defense force. Unlike the purely ceremonial force of the past, this one maintained real capability. Yet its primary mission remained peaceful exploration and protection of member worlds. Earth itself changed subtly. Military knowledge was no longer relegated to dusty historical archives. Academies taught both the art of war and the greater art of preventing it. On the Kraksun homeworld, human advisors worked alongside local leaders to help transform their society. It was slow, difficult work. Centuries of aggression could not be undone in a year. But already, young Kraksun were beginning to question the old ways. Admiral Baker eventually retired to a small island on Earth. She often walked the shore at sunset, thinking about what had been gained and lost. One evening, she found a message waiting. "Admiral, the first Kraksun human cultural exchange begins next month. We'd be honored if you would attend the opening ceremony. Peace isn't just the absence of conflict. It's the presence of understanding. We're finally beginning to understand. Captain Nelson." Baker smiled as she watched the sun sink below the horizon. 3,000 years of peace had been interrupted, but perhaps the peace that followed would be stronger for having been tested. The stars were waiting, and humanity moved forward, wiser, more vigilant, but still committed to the path they had chosen long ago. 5 years after the signing of the new charter, humanity continued to adjust to its dual role as both peacekeeper and warrior within the coalition. The balance was delicate but necessary. On the former Kraksun colony world of Traxxas IV, now a center for interspecies cooperation, a unique university had been established. The Institute for Strategic Peace drew students from across the coalition, including, most remarkably, young Kraksun eager to understand new ways of thinking. Professor Alan Hayes, once a tactical officer during the brief war, now taught the history of conflict resolution. His classroom held an unusual mix: humans alongside beings of dozens of species, including 6 Kraksun students. "The paradox that most species struggle with," Hayes explained, pointing to a holographic display showing military and diplomatic achievements side by side, "is that true peace requires both the ability to fight and the wisdom not to." A young Kraksun named Krektor raised a limb. His chitinous exoskeleton had the blue-green hue of youth. "Professor, my people believed strength existed only to be used. The concept of restraint as power still confuses many of us." Hayes nodded. "That's understandable. Think of it this way. Anyone can destroy. Creation and preservation are the more difficult tasks." After class, Hayes met with Admiral Baker, who now served as the coalition's special envoy for emerging civilizations. Her hair had gone completely white, but her eyes remained sharp and clear. "How are your students progressing?" she asked as they walked through the campus gardens where plants from 100 worlds grew together. "Better than I expected," Hayes admitted, "especially the Kraksun. They approach everything with such intensity, including learning." Baker smiled, not unlike humans in that way. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent message. A previously unknown species had appeared at the edges of coalition space. Initial contacts suggested they were highly advanced and potentially hostile. Within hours, Baker and Hayes joined a special coalition council session via quantum link. The new species called themselves the Vordax, and they had rejected all diplomatic overtures. "Their technology appears superior to anything in our arsenal," reported Defense Coordinator Maria Chen. "Scans suggest weapons capabilities we can't match." President William Foster, Miller's successor, addressed the council with calm determination. The coalition faces its first true test under the new charter. We must respond with unity and resolve. The response was swift but measured. The coalition defense fleet mobilized, but took defensive positions only. Diplomatic channels remained open despite repeated rejections. Earth activated its production facilities, but did not yet begin manufacturing weapons. 3 tense weeks passed. The Vordax probed coalition defenses, but did not attack. Then, unexpectedly, they requested a direct meeting with a Cracksun representative. High Commander Zrek, once humanity's bitter enemy and now a respected coalition representative, volunteered immediately. "I understand their thinking better than most," he explained. "They are testing us, looking for weakness. I once did the same." The meeting took place on a neutral station. When Zrek returned, he requested an immediate council session. "The Vordax are not what they appear," he announced. "They are not a naturally aggressive species. They have been watching us for decades. This was a test, not of our military strength, but of how we would use it." A ripple of surprise moved through the council chamber. Their society faced extinction centuries ago when they encountered a truly hostile force. They survived by appearing stronger than they were. Now they seek allies, but only those who understand that power means nothing without restraint. Baker exchanged a meaningful glance with Hayes across the chamber. The Vordax joined the coalition 3 months later. Their advanced technology accelerated scientific progress across all member worlds. Their defensive systems strengthened the coalition's security without increasing its offensive capabilities. At the signing ceremony, the Vordax ambassador approached Baker. "We watched your species for a long time. 3,000 years of peace impressed us. But how you responded when that peace was broken, that convinced us you were worthy allies." Baker smiled. "We're still learning that balance ourselves." "As are we all," the ambassador replied. "That is why we journey among the stars. Not to conquer, but to understand."